When you run workloads on Kubernetes, one of the easiest things to get wrong is resource requests. We define CPU and memory from estimates, but real workloads change. Request too much, and you waste cluster capacity. Request too little, and you get throttling, or an OOM kill. Vertical Pod Autoscaler exists to replace that guess with data. It watches what your workloads actually consume and recommends the requests they really need. Where the Horizontal Pod Autoscaler changes how many replicas you run, VPA changes how big each pod is. By default, the recommender builds its own aggregate of usage and checkpoints it. You can point it at Prometheus instead, so it uses the metrics you already retained and comes back with a useful recommendation immediately after a restart instead of relearning from nothing. There are three moving parts. The recommender analyzes usage and writes recommendations onto the VPA object. The admission controller is a mutating webhook that rewrites pod requests as pods are created. The updater watches running pods and acts when their requests have drifted. The most useful thing about VPA is that you do not have to automate anything. In off mode, it only writes recommendations. You get to see what every workload actually needs before you change a single thing. When you are ready, the update mode matters. Initial applies recommendations only when a pod is created. Recreate AVIX pods to apply them. And in-place resizing changes the running pod without restarting it, which removes the biggest objection to turning VPA on at all. You should still set boundaries. Min allowed and max allowed keep recommendations in the same range. Control values decides whether limits move with requests, and by default they do. Scale proportionally. Never put VPA and HPA on the same resource metric. Let VPA own CPU and memory, and scale horizontally on something else entirely. Queue depth, requests per second, whatever actually drives your load. One thing that surprises people. By default, the updater will not touch a workload running fewer than 2 replicas, and it respects pod disruption budgets. That is a safety feature, not a bug. At platform scale, you can run more than one recommender, tune differently, and point a workload at one of them by name. A conservative one for production, a tighter one for staging. And that is the real value. VPA turns resource requests from a number somebody guessed once into a signal you can measure, review, and automate when you are ready.